Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ben Wasserman Show. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you all are having a great day, great week. If you're watching this live, thank you very much. If you're listening to this after on Apple or Spotify, thank you very much as well. We got a lot to talk about. I have a special guest, and I will introduce him momentarily, but we're going to get into Frankie Montas out for the season. Yankees pitchers and catchers reported just a few days ago. New York Knicks playing good. Knicks and Nets both on their All-Star break. Rangers on a six-game heater. But without further ado, I have a special guest on. His name is Rami Lavi. He is a board operator and producer in Baltimore, Maryland for the station called 105.7 The Fan. It's an Audacy station. So welcome, Rami. How you doing today?
Hey, thanks for having me, Ben. I'm doing all right, happy to be here.
Yeah, so thanks again. Happy to have you on. Happy to talk about, how you got to your position and how you, like your journey after college working with Audacy. So if you wouldn't mind, can you just like describe to me a little bit after college how you got to the position where you are now?
Yeah, so my story is a little bit different than most. I didn't get a degree in communications or anything like that, journalism. I was always a huge sports fan. I grew up listening to WFAN in New York, listening to podcasts like Bill Simmons, Ryan Russillo, people like that. That's who I grew up listening to. And then, I made it when after school, I was kind of trying to figure out what to do. I had a sales job. And so I kind of wanted to get into sports media, but I didn't really know where to start. Actually, I reached out to Craig Carton a while ago, and he was like, "Hey, you gotta just throw yourself into it. Got to start somewhere." And so I started a podcast, which is the Rami Lavi podcast. You can find it on all platforms. But I started the podcast. I was like, "All right, let me just try and do something here." I applied for a sales job because that's what I had. That's what I had experience in. I applied for a sales job in Maryland. At the end of 2020. So it was right after the pandemic. Pandemic was kind of still going on. I moved down to Maryland because my parents were living here at the time. So I moved down here, applied for a sales job, got the sales job. Took about 4 months to get the job, but got the sales job. And then 4 months later, or not 10 months later, I transferred to the on-air side. A lot of stuff happened in between, but I was able to transfer to the on-air side. Started just, cutting tape during overnights, just sitting there alone in a studio cutting tape and prepping the shows for the next day, and then slowly work your way up to eventually I've produced, board opt a bunch of shows. I've done the traffic reports and sports updates down here. It's not a huge team down here, so I've done a lot down here. The podcast has grown. My podcast is now available on the Audacy app, which is great, like on the company network.
That's
And I
awesome.
and I started doing some work for Fox Sports as well on the TV side, some pre-production for TV. So a lot of fun stuff, but
Yeah.
definitely, I mean, my number one thing that I would tell people if you're trying to do this or in any industry, whatever your goal is, just chase it and you won't regret it because, there's like you'll find a way, you'll figure it out a way. So like I came from really no background in any of this stuff and I was like, this is what I want to do. So I'm doing it now and I'm, not exactly where I want to be yet, but getting there hopefully.
Yeah, especially in the sports industry, it's a very long-term game. You have to, as you said, you have to work your way up. That's what I hear from a lot of people. So you mentioned that like you didn't come from any like sports media background, like you didn't do a lot. You were a sales guy. Did you teach yourself everything, or was there like a team around you or people around you that kind of taught you a lot about how to cut tape or just how to produce?
So definitely a lot of people to thank and shout out. So I'll start full. First of all, I just always listened, and I remember when I was a little kid, I had like this clunky like MP3 player that I used to broadcast into, do like fake broadcasts. I would just make up games in my mind or whatever, and just broadcast them as if there was something going on in front of me. But also, I would come up with talk shows. If I would watch a game the next day, I was sitting in class and I was like writing down like an article about the game that I watched the night before at home. Probably instead of listening in class. So stuff like that would happen. But then once I actually got into the industry, obviously I'm willing to listen to anyone and take advice from anyone. And so whoever told me anything, there were so many people along the way who kind of, especially at the company, once I got to Audacy, Kevin Friedman, who was my sales manager here, really taught me everything about like the media industry. And then Chuck Sapienza and Spike Eskin, who are the program directors here in Baltimore and in New York, I spoke to them a bunch of times and they helped me out. Kyle Irway was the first person who I trained with. He taught me how to cut tape. And really everyone, I mean, from Caleb Breda to just so many different people. on the air side, obviously Jason LaCanfora, Glenn Clark, Bob Haney, Vinny Serrato, all these people, Joe LaCroix, who's a producer here. I mean, there's just a bunch of names. It's like you said, it sounds like a team, but I feel like I've learned so much from every single person individually, and anyone I've reached out to, people I've had on the podcast, Johnny Lazarus, who was one of the first people to come
Oh,
on my podcast. John Jastrzemski, also one of the first one. Brian Hoke, I think, was my actual first guest. So there were so many different people who I spoke to along the way. And I'm someone who, when I record a podcast, I'll listen to it 4 or 5 times afterwards. When I produce a show, I'll listen to the show back to see if there was anything that could have gone better. When I run the board for a show, I'll listen to every break, how it came in and out of the breaks, how it sounded, and make sure it sounds good, stuff like that. So I'm maybe a little bit of a perfectionist in that sense, but at the same time, like I just am trying to get better, and so there are so many people along the way who have helped me. And so those are some of the names. If I left anyone out, I'm sorry,
yeah.
but yeah, there's a lot.
I think you have to be a perfectionist. Like you always got to strive to get better each and every day because there's so many people that do what me and you do podcasts or whatever, and you know everybody can just watch a YouTube video or do whatever, but we always have to watch it back and see what we did. So I wanted to ask you about your like podcasting strategy. Do you do your podcast live or do you record them and edit them and then post them?
So with my schedule, it's so inconsistent because I'll have a shift on a Sunday, like during the football season. I worked every Sunday from 9 a.m. till 8 p.m. And if the Ravens played on Sunday night football, then all of a sudden that goes to 1 a.m. You know what I mean? Because we just did game day. So it was pregame, it was during the game, post game, everything that we were doing. Because I produced Ravens pre and post game this year in Baltimore. So it was real. Doing it live obviously would be a huge commitment, just time wise. Just doing it like, okay, I have to do it these times every single time. So I'll
Mhm.
record something on a Sunday for an hour, and then I'll post it on Wednesday's episode, let's say, or I'll find times to record, and then I'll post them. So I don't record live as of now, just because of how crazy the schedule is on the air side and inconsistent more than anything. If I had a consistent schedule that I could do on the air, then that would be great. But right now, at this point in my career, I don't have a consistent schedule with the on-air
Yeah.
stuff that I do. So still working on that.
No, I can tell it's definitely tough to find time, especially if you're having a guest on. So I also want to ask you, how do you like cut tape in Baltimore? Do you use Adobe Audition or does Audacy have their own separate platform that you guys use?
We use Audition. Same what I would do with my podcast. I record on Audition. So yeah, Adobe, pretty much all of it. And then obviously once we were putting it on the air, we use Wide Orbit for everything that goes out over the air.
Okay.
So and obviously the board and all that stuff. So there's a lot of different stuff going on. But when you're actually cutting the tape, we're usually like recording stuff into Wide Orbit or into Adobe and then cutting it up from there. Yeah.
All right, I got it. So what would you say like your day to day is like? So you mentioned if it's a Sunday game day, which is obviously over now, but you got in at 9 a.m. and you left at 8 p.m. and that's all producing. Are you a part of the shows at all in Baltimore? Or is it just like mostly producing and making sure you get the commercial breaks and making sure you do all the elements and everything?
So it depends on the show. Some shows are a little bit more, I guess, inclusive. It happens to be so. Like this week, I did the afternoon show, and the afternoon show, our afternoon drive from 2 to 6 p.m. is a 3-person show.
Okay.
So on a day like that, I'll get in at about 11 a.m. There's 3 people there. One of them is the update guy, also. So it's not like I'm doing anything. I'm literally just prepping the show. I get there, like I said, 11 a.m. So 3 hours before the show. I know what we're going to talk about. We put together a show sheet. I sit down with the hosts about an hour before the show. So those first 2 hours is really just me putting everything together, putting together the stories, coming up with sound, and creating segments out of it. And then, making sure we have all the information for the guests and what time they're going to be on and all that stuff. Make sure everything is in the system correctly. If we have any segmented stuff that needs to play at a certain time, any sponsors that need to play at certain times, we take care of that. And then right before the show, about an hour before the show, we sit down, we go over everything, and they'll make any. Obviously, the on air talent will make any adjustments that they want to make, and then we go and we get on air. And I'm the board op, so the producer in Baltimore is also the board op. So I'm running the show on the board and also producing it. So I'll get on the mic a couple of times here and there, but not a lot. Some of the weekend shows are a little bit differently, where I'm more included as part of part of the programming, especially if it's a solo show. the host will bring me on a bunch, obviously have a mic. My job, the first thing I was told by Chuck Sapienza when he hired me was, you're very talkative. Your mic stays off. Just remember that. You are not the talent. Your mic stays off. You are going to have to shut up and let them talk. So whether you're saying something in their ear, whether you're talking on air, he's like, just keep it to a minimum. But some shows, they'll bring me on and they're more than happy to have me talk. I've also done sports updates. I filled in as the update guy. So obviously, every half hour we do an update. It's about 90 seconds of just, here are the top 3, top 4, 5 stories that are going on right now. I had to do them like the week after the Super Bowl, or no, this was, I guess, the week before the Super Bowl, when there was nothing going on in Baltimore sports. So it was kind of tough to find stories to talk about. I've also filled in as the backup traffic reporter here. So I've done a lot of different stuff,
Oh,
both
okay,
on
that's
and off the
different.
air. Yeah, definitely done a bunch of stuff here.
Well, I mean, that's all good reps, though, whether you're talking about traffic or sports. I mean, you got to really focus the craft.
Yep.
Um, so I just want to go back to when you said your program director, your boss, told you that they're going to mute your mic. Was that like a learning experience for you? Like, what was your reaction after that? Because I'm sure your goal is to talk, but you also have to realize like what your role is.
So yeah, I mean, it was before I even started, so it wasn't like he was reprimanding me for my mic being on at any point, you know.
Yeah.
So it was just like he was kind of just preparing me, because I come in there and I'm like, okay, I'm a sales guy. I talk a lot. That's what salespeople do. And I have my podcast. I think I know everything about sports. And I'm coming into the company and I'm transferring basically now to the programming side. And so I'm like, yeah, let's go. Let's get on the air. Let's get on the air. Let's start talking. And he's like, no, so you're going to be sitting there overnight cutting tape and your mic's going to stay off until I tell you that you can turn your mic on, which eventually it wasn't even up to him. Eventually, if a host says, hey, Rami, tell us a little bit about yourself, or what do you think about this? Or there's a segment where, we do, for example, a buy or sell segment where we have 2 hosts and I'm telling them, do you buy this or do you sell this? And bringing up different sports topics. Eventually, obviously, I'm going to be woven into the content. So it kind of just naturally happened. But initially, yeah, I knew that wasn't my, that's not what you want to hear on day one. You don't want to hear, hey, your mic's staying off and this is what you're going to do. But I also knew that that's the only way to work yourself up and build yourself up. And then eventually when he came to me, I remember the first time I did sports updates, I was like, hey, he's like, hey, you're producing the midday show today. I was like, great. I said, but there's no update anchor here today. He's like, okay, you're doing them. What's like, it wasn't like a whole big, to do where he's like, today's your first day doing the updates. Congratulations. No, it was just like, yeah, you're doing the updates today. Great. And that was it. It's kind of
Yeah.
very like nonchalant. And that's kind of how it's been. So everything, and it's kind of funny because you have to look at where you came from to, judge your progress. I always want to be appreciative of where I am now. So in order to do that, you have to look at where you came from. But because everything just kind of happens like that and kind of snowballs, it's hard to really take a moment. And I try and do this as much as I can to take a step back and be like, oh, that was a big day today. Like I just did the updates for the first time, and not just be like, yeah, it was just another day. So I try and do that as much as possible.
Yeah, and I was going to mention this before you. I mentioned, I'm not sure if you did, but that you're like a New York sports fan, so WFAN is probably like the main goal. But are you ever like grateful that you are in a different situation in Baltimore where you have a lot more opportunities compared to WFAN when they have a whole social media team, a whole update team, full-time producers for each show?
Yeah, yes and no. So obviously the pros are that, you get a lot more on air, and, like you said, like I'm the next guy. I'm doing the morning show next week, like as a producer,
Oh,
producing
that's
the
awesome.
morning drive, because the producer's out and a different guy's doing something else, and basically I'm the one who's left and I'm doing it. So that means that I'm doing, the updates for that show also. At I know that, I'm not going to be doing producing and updates on WFAN. If I started there, I probably wouldn't do producing or updates for 5 years. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I think that getting the experience is great, but I think to take the next step, you do have to move on to a market that's a little bit bigger, that is a little bit more, um, that gives you more exposure also, because like with the limited smaller market that it is, it also has smaller exposure. So I think as far as experience, it's fantastic. Like I'm getting real like reps in real time, on air reps, real experience, that I could then use potentially if I do end up in a bigger market to say, hey, look, I've done all this stuff already. Maybe that can move me along further at a quicker pace.
Yeah, for sure. So when you go from like doing an afternoon drive to the morning drive to doing weekends, how do you like focus on your sleep and like sleep schedule? Because I'm sure they're just bouncing you all around. Like, how do you manage everything like that?
I take naps. That's I mean that's basically what it is because like and sometimes a nap means that I'm sleeping from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. and that's my nap that night. You know what I mean? So yeah, when I do morning drive, that means a lot of times getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I luckily I live close to the studio here, so 4 a.m. is not too bad to get up for a morning show. I've done the morning traffic a lot of times, so that's not bad. When I do an overnight shift, I don't get home till 6 o'clock in the morning. So you know, those are the two sides of the spectrum there.
Yeah.
Um, and everything in between. I mean, sometimes I'll get home from a shift, and it could be that I finished the shift. It was the 10 p.m. shift. Let's say I did the evening shift from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And then I get home, and it's like, well, now I need to record a podcast and edit it and post it because my podcast goes out on Wednesday morning and it's Tuesday night. And that's what happened this week. I did the evening shift on Tuesday night, and then I went to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning because that's when I posted my podcast. And it's just how it is. And sometimes it's inconsistent. So there's a day next week where I'm doing that evening shift again, 6 to 10 p.m. And then the next morning I have to do the morning show. That means I'm getting home at 10 p.m. I'm probably going straight to sleep because I know at 4 o'clock in the morning I'm gonna have to get up and go to the studio. So yeah, it's fun. Like I always look at it as I try and have fun with it. Like the more opportunities I get, like it's just so much fun. I'm still like that's not lost on me. Maybe eventually that'll wear off, but right now I'm still pretty young. I'm 25. I'm having fun, and this is all like it's all almost like a game to me. Like I'm having so much fun. Like people talk about the money and different things like that, and which is not great at this point. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, I don't know. I'm having fun, and hopefully, if I continue to have fun, continue to put the work in, I'll get to where I want to get.
No, and I think that's the perfect mindset, and having fun and enjoying every day and being happy is the number one priority, because I'm sure you'd rather do what you're doing right now and make whatever money than make a lot of money and not be as happy and do whatever. So I think that's great. What would you say is like your highlight moment so far at Audacy in Baltimore? Like, is there any one day or any like call or anything that was just like awesome?
I'll give you a caller because he was on Zach Gelb's show last night, which was just so funny. This guy, Bob in Parkville, calls in almost every day, and he's 86 years old, and he's very angry about everything and how sports have changed since the time that he watched sports
Sports
more
as a whole,
consistently.
or Baltimore?
He's just angry about everything. I don't know what to. And so when you're screening calls, but you're also the producer and also the board op, it's an interesting dynamic because you pick up the phone and you got to listen also to what's going on air, and if you need to hit anything or send them to break or anything like that. So mostly, like I take their name and location. Hey, fan, what's your name? Where are you calling from? And I'll tell you what do you want to talk about. And I want them to give me as quickly as possible what they want to talk about so that I can hang up, put them on hold, hang up, and then get back to what I'm doing. You know, Even if it's during the break, there's always stuff going on during the break. And I'm the only person in that room. So Bob, though, has a special way of he gets angry before we even put him on the air. And so he's yelling at me, and I'm like, Bob, but sometimes, he's still talking, and I'll just put him on hold and be like, okay, I'm just going to put him on hold. He's now on hold. I know what he wants to talk about. If they want to go, if they want to take him, some hosts, a lot of hosts don't take him, but I guess Zach is not familiar with Bob. The last time he called into a national show, CBS Sports Network, was 2 years ago. And you could go on Twitter. I think I may have retweeted it. It's just fantastic. Bob in Baltimore, also known as Bob in Parkville, 86 years old, just yelling about God knows what. I don't even know what he was yelling about, and Zach didn't really get it, but Zach thought it was hilarious, and they had fun with it also. So that's cool. So he's a caller. I think the best show that I had overall was I filled in, and this was so much fun. My favorite show was the Ravens postgame show was hosted by Glenn Clark and Rita Hubbard. They're awesome. And I've done a bunch of shows with them as well. They're super fun. The first time I was ever on air, the first time my mic actually ever went out on air other than traffic reports, my first time on the fan was a guy named Bruce Cunningham, who's retired, but he was hosting the 4th of July show because they bring in like the old retired host to host it because it was during an Orioles game and no one's listening to the radio at that point.
Yeah.
So, and the hot dog eating contest was going on. And so I was the correspondent, my first ever time on air was I was the correspondent for the hot dog eating contest, and I was given a little play-by-play as I was watching from ESPN up
Oh, that
above
sounds
me.
awesome.
So that was my first time on air, which was kind of funny. I didn't think I'd be talking about hot dogs. And also, Dean Kramer was starting for the Orioles that day, and so because I'm Jewish and my dad's Israeli, he was asking me about Dean Kramer and whatever. So that was kind of funny. My most fun day though was with Bob Haney and Vinny Serrato. I've had a lot of fun with Bob because I produced the Orioles pregame show during the baseball season, which we do live on home games. We do it live from Pickles Pub, which is across the street from Camden Yards. It's a really fun location. Everyone's out there getting drunk, and so it's Bob Haney, and we had Bill Ripken doing it mostly last year, and so it's me, Bob, and Bill Ripken sitting there, and we have so much fun just hanging out. And during the breaks, it's just we're all having fun and laughing, and we're drinking beers while we're doing the show, which is just a funny dynamic. And those summer nights were just awesome. Every night in the summer was just fantastic.
This is a home game.
This every home game, every weekday home game in the summer, we do it
Wow.
live. So the Fridays were the best because the Fridays, especially when the Yankees were in town, at about 4 p.m. the whole bar starts to fill up, and
Yeah.
and we're doing the pregame. It was just so much fun. Obviously, for the road games, we're doing it in the studio. It's not as fun. It's a little bit of a different story. Although I do have a funny Bill Ripken story. It's about a minute before we're supposed to go on air, and the doors in the studio are very heavy, obviously, right? You have to push the doors.
Yeah.
By the way, I just want to say this: everything reminds me of something. Is I think Adam Carolla said that. I think it's the title of his book. But I truly am like that, where everything reminds me of something. So I can ramble for like
No, that's
I still
okay.
want. I'm still going to get back to Bob and Vinny and maybe my favorite day, but we've snowballed here. But
That's
the Bill
perfectly
Ripken
fine.
story is he walks into the studio and he pushes the heavy door, and he spilled an entire like extra large Dunkin' coffee everywhere in my studio,
On
not in
the
the
board?
host studio. On the floor, just on the
Oh, okay.
floor, right when you walk into the studio. And I'm like, it's like creeping by my feet though, like to where I'm standing by the board. And so I start running out of the room. I'm like, okay, we have 60 seconds till we're going on air, but I want to go clean this up. He he pushes me back in, and he's the host, right? He could just go right into his studio and sit down and start the show, and he's like, no, you have stuff to do. He said, I'll take care of it. Bob will fill for me, when we open the show, and don't worry about it. And he went and cleaned it up himself, which I just thought was cool. Like, this is like a former major league baseball player who's
Yeah.
obviously his brother is freaking Cal Ripken, and he's the host, and he's telling me, no, you go do your thing, I'll clean it up myself. And so he's a cool guy. He's really fun. I've had a lot of fun with him. But Bob Haney's a great host here in Baltimore. And he hosts a show with it's called Vinny and Haney. Vinny Serrato, former NFL GM, and they host the midday show, and I got to produce their show, and they brought me on air a ton. We ended up talking a ton. And I also did the sports updates during the midday show that day. So that was probably my most fun day. It was a little bit hectic because Bob and Vinny both got stuck in traffic and showed up about 5 minutes before we were supposed to go on air. So I was there like 2 hours early trying to prep
Yeah.
the show, and I was there alone. So I was kind of prepping the rest of the show kind of as we went. Like in those 5 minutes, I prepped the first segment, and then once we went to break, I was prepping the next segment. So it was kind of, prep the show as you go. But it was a fun show. I will say that.
Well, I'm sure you were stressing out before that. I'm sure there's
Oh,
a
I was
maybe
freaking out. Luckily, I've run I've run the afternoon show a bunch of times. I've run a bunch of different shows. I've worked with Bob before because I worked with him. I'd never worked with Vinny before, so that was a little bit stressful. And I never done the updates before. That was my first time doing the updates. So it was like I'm worried about my own stuff going on, and at the same time, I know I have to worry about their stuff. But luckily, I had a bunch of people help me out. Joe LaCroix and Tim Barbalace, who are the producers for the morning show and the afternoon show, were both in studio. So they kind of, were able to help me out also. They're, the way it works in the building, there's like 12 studios. So they were in their own studios, and they were able to kind of talk to me and be like, hey, yeah, do this or that or whatever. So yeah, like I said, support is key.
No, that's what it's all about. You got to have a great team.
Yeah.
So
And
I saw in
like
the
you said, the most hectic day was the most fun day also, though. So that's
yeah,
kind of how it works sometimes.
and I'm sure you learned a lot that day. You said you had a ex NFL GM. That must have been awesome.
Yeah, if you look on Bleacher Report, if you look up who the worst NFL GMs are of all
Cool.
time, his name comes up as number one. But still, ex NFL GM as it
Yes,
is,
sir.
one way or another. I love you, Vinny. Don't listen to this.
Hey, he took the phone calls, and he's probably not watching anyway. But I'm at
Yep.
that's super cool. So I also saw you're a production assistant for Fox Sports. Can you explain a little bit about what you do with them?
So it's actually a really cool team I work on. Fox, we do obviously we have baseball, we have football, we have college basketball. We had the World Cup this year, and so my team we make all the like highlight packages that you see in game and the promos pre-game. So anytime it's like coming up on Fox is whatever
Oh yeah.
So I work for the producer who produces all those spots. He will come to me and say, hey, we need footage of this, this, and this. And I get like the footage. And sometimes I've seen really cool camera angles. Like you never see it where like the camera all of a sudden like pans down to the floor. Like I get the full raw footage of like the Super Bowl, you know? And
Oh, just
and
like from the Fox cameras,
yeah,
not
from from
not
all
on
the
YouTube
Fox
or anything.
cameras. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm editing, clips to put together some of those really cool shots that you see, those slow-mo shots, those a lot of what we use is like the ground level shots where you see it from like the low angle. And
Mhm.
it's really cool. It's working on TV, and it's also really fun to then sit on Sunday on my couch and see the Fox, when it comes up and it's like, hey, I worked on that. That's cool.
Yeah, that's definitely awesome. Is that all remote? Like, is your team in
Yeah. So
California?
my team is in the LA and in the Charlotte studio. So yeah, so it's totally remote. I haven't met anyone. It's a little bit tough, because it's a Zoom call and then we're just chatting online all day. So it's kind of tough to kind of balance that. It's not ideal, the remote life, I guess, but it's still fun. I still try and get as much production done as I can every day, with everything else going on.
Yeah. Is that on Premiere Pro?
So no, we use a Google system called IAS.
Okay. I've never
And
heard of
it's
that.
yeah, it's a Google, it's our own Google, it's a Google software that it's in Google. That way we have access to everything. Everything gets uploaded into there and then we save it. And it's a shared file with everyone. So that's kind of a
Okay,
filing system. Yeah.
that's cool. So you said you work for Fox Sports, do Audacy, all these different hours. When do you have time to watch your own teams, Rangers and the Knicks and the Yankees?
Well, don't forget the Jets. I'm a Jet fan.
Oh, same.
Um,
That's amazing.
yeah. So when I come home every day, I guess really between like 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. is kind of blocked out where I watch sports. And if I'm in the studio during that time, then I have my laptop up and we have, 6 TVs in the studio up. So I'll make sure we get our games on. If, it's a little bit different because we're out of market. So I usually have to bring my laptop in to make sure that I have the game on. But yeah, I've sometimes not watched the games and then had to watch it at kind of weird hours when I after the game is already aired. So yeah, I've done a bunch of different things when it comes to watching games, but yeah, it's definitely. And also, I could sit on my couch and do a lot of the Fox work while I'm watching games because the game will be up on my TV and I could be still looking at highlights of I don't know Purdue basketball, on my on my laptop while I'm watching the games.
Oh, Purdue is pretty good. I mean, they lost yesterday to
They
Maryland.
lost to Maryland. That was unbelievable. I really wanted to go. We had like, one of the studios. I didn't know whose they were, so I didn't take them. But one of the studios just had 2 tickets sitting at like on the desk in the
For anybody?
studio, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, I just kind of want to like it's tonight. If no one's here anymore, like I was leaving, and we were about to because we put the pregame show for the Maryland game was about to start with the flagship station. We're about to have the Maryland game on our airwaves. So the only person who was left in the building was the producer for Maryland basketball and the hosts for the pregame show. So I'm like, I could just take these. There's no one else taking these right now. And I didn't. I was like, I don't know whose they are. I'm not gonna, I don't want to deal with this later. But as I was sitting there in that studio, that was the studio that I prepped yesterday's afternoon show in, and I was like, I kind of want to take these, but I didn't. So
Maybe if you worked there for a little bit longer, like a few more years, then you'd feel comfortable taking them.
no, well, it's different. If I asked for tickets, they'd give me tickets. Anything I've ever asked for, they've
Yeah.
given me. It's just I don't want to be that guy who asks too much.
Yeah. Oh, so you guys get free tickets to Maryland and Ravens games and Orioles?
So yeah, so it's funny because when I was in sales, I went to every Ravens game. I was in the suite for every single Ravens game. At the 50-yard line
Mhm.
with unlimited food and whatever and beer. And then once I transferred over to actually the on-air side, you'd think I'd get into the games more, but the truth was I did not because I was in the studio for every Ravens game because we did pre and post game show from the studio. So that's where I was for all the Ravens games. For the Orioles, the days obviously that they were home, I'd finish the show, I'd pack up all the stuff, and so about that, we finished the show at about 7. So I was usually able to get into the ballpark at about 7:15, um, and get either company seats or get a press pass for the Orioles game. So that was cool.
How is Camden Yards? I really want to visit this summer as a
One of the
Yankees
best
fan.
stadiums from a pure baseball perspective, one of the best stadiums you'll go to. It doesn't have all the cool like new foods and amenities and stuff like that maybe a Nationals Park or Yankee Stadium has. All the different fun stuff like Kiddie Field at City Field, like all those kid stuff and extra entertainment. But from a pure as a baseball purist, there's no better place to watch a baseball game. Also, one of the coolest events that I went to actually with the company was I went to the BMW Championship, which is a PGA golf tournament.
Yeah,
And I don't know if you've ever been to one of these golf tournaments, but when
I want to. They look awesome.
you're there, you're just standing, you're like arm's length away from some of the greatest athletes in the world, and they're right in front of you. You hear them talking because it's quiet, and it's kind of just like hanging out with a bunch of your buddies, and it's super cool.
Yeah.
I got to see I think it was Bryson DeChambeau shot like a 59 one day when I was there. Something ridiculous. Yeah.
Wow. I
Unreal.
saw last week they had, I'm not sure which tournament it was. I don't really follow golf that much, but at the 16th hole last week,
Yeah,
it was
waste
wild.
management. Yeah, that's the waste management is known to always be like that, where they all go crazy. Like it's just a crazy thing. Yeah, I don't know why it's like that because all usually golf tournaments, like there's a lot of there's a lot of alcohol flowing, but it's not like that where it's like crazy. It's not like the fans are
Yeah.
rowdy. But yeah, the waste management is known to be like a more rowdy event.
I saw a TikTok that some guys got there at 5 a.m. They didn't even, the players didn't get to the 16th hole until like 6 p.m. They're just drinking the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you just sit there, and a lot of times there's all these different, there's these different clubs that you could go into. Like if you have a Rolex, there's a Rolex club. If you're a BMW driver at this particular event, there's a BMW club, and you could just go in. So because I was part of the radio station, I had access to a couple of the clubs, and I brought a friend with me, and we're going in and just there's mixed drinks, there's cocktails, there's beer just flowing. It's just I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a really fun event. It was also the middle of the summer, and we were sweating because you're walking. I mean, you're walking all around the course. Like, eventually we settled on between the 10th and 11th holes. We were able to see, one group finish and then the next group tee off. And if we ran back and forth but you're still doing a ton of walking. Like it's crazy.
Yeah. All right. So going back to baseball very quickly, and
Yeah.
I'll wrap this up. I don't want to take all your time. Would you say, have you been to PNC Park?
I've not been to PNC Park. I do want to go. I want to go to
I want to
AT&T. I
go
want to go to PNC too. I haven't been to.
What
Obviously,
was the first one that you said?
AT&T. I don't know what it's called these days in San Francisco.
Oh yeah, that's always been my number one. But I want to go to Camden. I went to Fenway last year, 2 years ago actually, but it was only for a tour. I got to get back there. But
Fenway's fantastic. I was there in 2018. I think it's maybe my favorite ballpark. I was there when Tyler Austin and Joe Kelly got into the fight
oh,
in
that's actually
2018,
right.
Yankees Red Sox. Yes.
All right, so we'll finish it off talking a little hockey here. I know you're a Rangers fan. I'm a Devils fan. Your Rangers are on a 6-game heater. They're playing the
We're coming for you,
Oilers.
by the way.
Yeah, I know. I really need my Devils to finish in second place. What do you think about the Rangers? I mean, obviously they look like one of the scariest teams in the NHL right now.
If you asked me this question a week ago, I would have told you I was a little bit nervous, maybe. But obviously, a week ago they traded for Vladimir Tarasenko, and things change. All of a sudden, it's a totally different team, right? They have 3 lines right now that they can legitimately roll 3 lines. And that's what they're going to do in the playoffs. I think right now, the only thing they're looking for, they also don't forget like the defenseman that they picked up. Like that's a huge addition too, to have another guy that
Oh yeah,
solidifies their defense. The way Trouba's playing right now, obviously their top defensive pair, but the way Trouba and Keandre Miller are playing together right now, and then the kid line, like that is the life and soul of this team is the kid line. That it seems like every time they're on the ice, something special is happening. It was like that started last year in the playoffs. This year got off to a little bit of a slower start. Turk loves to mess with the lineup, so he kind of changed the lineup a little bit, shuffled the lines. I don't love that, but it seems like they found something right now. Even with Panarin not even playing on the line with Tarasenko right now, Panarin's playing on the line with Trocheck and VZ, but that's working out as well. And I don't think they're going to trade Kravtsov either, because that's just it's a great, unless they could get a great return, because that's a good piece for them to have. It's a good insurance piece if someone gets hurt in the postseason. I mean, 2015 when Matt Zuccarello got hurt, that kind of threw off their whole. They were the President's Cup winner that year, and then that kind of threw off their whole postseason run. And it was frustrating. They ultimately obviously lost to Tampa, but they just didn't have enough offense in that series. Henrik Lundqvist stood on his head. So you don't want to see the same thing. Last year they survived a bunch of really bad starts by Igor. This year he's going to know what's happening once they get to the playoffs. He's not going to be shocked like he was in the first round last year. I mean,
nobody even talks about that anymore, but he got shelled in his first few games against Pittsburgh.
It was the two games in Pittsburgh, really, because I was at game one at Madison Square Garden that the Rangers should have won, but ultimately goes to triple overtime. Yeah, I was at Madison Square Garden for like 6 hours. It was not a fun experience.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd think like 6 hours at Madison Square Garden is my dream. It's my favorite building in the world, and
Not
yet
in playoff hockey. Too stressful.
not for 6 hours of playoff hockey. I'll tell you that much. And 3 hours of it was overtime. I was with Johnny Lazarus. Actually, it was wild. It was wild. Every break during the intermissions, we would just sit there and be like, seriously, this is still happening.
Yeah. Well, I remember watching that game. I think it finished past midnight the next day.
Yeah, and I got there early because we went to the bar across the street and we were drinking, and then we came into the building. I went to the Chase Lounge. I was like ready because playoff game. I wanted to get as much of the experience as possible. So I probably got to the city at about 5:45 p.m. and was ready to go off. And then, it drags on further and further and further.
But going back to that game just quickly, did you think that goal should have counted? Because I remember in that game they scored, and I think it was a kick. I don't remember it perfectly, but I thought they scored, to be honest.
So they called goalie interference. It wasn't a kick.
Yeah.
They called goalie interference. I think it was on Hedel, if I'm not mistaken. But you see clearly he turned his skates away from the goalie, and that's what you're taught to do. You're taught to turn your skates, and I don't know this for a fact. This is what Johnny was telling me there.
Yeah.
But if you turn your skates, then it's not goalie interference because you tried to get out of the way, and it should have been a good goal, and it would have saved me a lot of time and agony, and then ultimately a loss. So, yeah.
But they still won the series down 3-1.
I mean,
Crosby's injury was huge. Jari's injury, obviously huge. He came back for that game 7, but it's tough when you miss those games and then come back.
Yeah, and I mean, Zibanejad ties it with 5 minutes left in Game 7, and
Yeah.
I wasn't even there for that game. I was sitting right here in the living room, and I was like hiding from my TV, like I was like with my hands over my eyes. But yeah, this year, yeah, I think home ice will be huge. Whoever gets it, but it's going to be Devils Rangers in the first round. I don't doubt that, and it's going to be wild. And
Yeah.
I think I have a lot of confidence in the Rangers this year. It's going to be the Devils who are the young team who are in the playoffs for the first time. So it's not, and the Rangers are going to be the vet team. I think that puts more pressure on the Rangers. But the Rangers are really going for it. I think they're going to try and get another fourth liner. It might be Tyler Mott again. Let's roll. I think this is a better team. It's funny. I have a friend who's a huge Rangers fan. Actually works. He's one of the broadcast. I don't know what his title is, president of broadcast or something here in Maryland, actually, but regionally for Audacy. But he's a Rangers fan, and he's a pessimistic Rangers fan. Like all year last year, he would tell me he's like just don't get too overhyped, don't get too excited, man. He's like, yeah, he's like it's fun. They're a fun young team, but just stay calm. This year, he's like, I'm not scared of anyone, and it's so not like him. It's so funny. He's like Boston, maybe. He's like, but what scares you about Boston? I'm like, their top line. He's like, yeah, that's fair. But yeah.
I'll say this, and it might sound crazy. Boston's going to win the President's Trophy, and I think that might kill them because you see in history,
every year, yep,
just crumble.
Yep. No, I agree with you.
But the Rangers, I don't want to say I'm scared of the Rangers. Devils beat them 3 out of 4 times. And Devils remind me a lot of the Rangers last year, right?
I agree.
Don't drive a lot of play. Their 5-on-5 play isn't amazing. Devils' power play isn't as good as the Rangers' power play. But it's like the Devils, just like the Rangers last year, they just find ways to win. I know it's not a 3-on-3 overtime in the playoffs, but they just find ways to win. And I think that momentum is just going to keep going all throughout the season. Devils need Jack Hughes back, though. That's the biggest thing. He's coming back next week. But whether the Devils get the 2 seed or the 3 seed, I still think they're going to win in probably 7 games. I don't see the series going anything less than 6.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. That's probably going to go the distance. It's going to be stressful on both sides.
Yeah,
The good news is that we won't have to travel too far to go to Devils games because those will be cheaper than the Madison Square Garden
yeah,
games.
I know they fill up the place, unfortunately, for
Yeah,
this
but
fan.
yeah. So again, I'm looking forward to it. Nervously looking forward to it. I hope the Rangers, just their experience, can lead them to victory in that series. Yep.
And that is what makes me nervous as a Devils fan. We only have Andre Palat, who
Yep.
obviously has more playoff experience than half the players in the league. But that's
Yep.
really like Nico has never made the playoffs. Just for bats, never made the playoffs. Well, Nico, no, I'm not sure. He didn't make it in 17. I think that he did. That was his first season. Excuse me, but it's just not a lot. They didn't. They lost in 5 games. So
Yep.
that's that. And then talking about the Yankees, and then we'll wrap it up here.
No
Frankie
Knicks. I
Montas.
mean, the Knicks are playing so well. Come on.
Okay, okay. I don't
I
usually
got to
talk
give some love to
about
the
that.
Knicks.
Okay, Knicks 3-game winning streak, All-Star break. I think they're actually one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. I think they can do something in the playoffs. What do you think?
I think they're the fifth best team in the Eastern Conference. I'll give you that.
The Celtics, Bucks.
Philly and Cleveland.
Oh, you think the Cavs are better than the Knicks?
I think if the Knicks get the 5 seed, they could beat the Cavs in the first round of the playoffs. How
Yeah.
about that?
No, I
But I
think
do think the Cavs have, they have the guy who's the it factor, who's Donovan Mitchell, who's a superstar, and the Knicks really don't have that guy. Like, I
well,
love Jalen Brunson. I think Jalen Brunson has changed this team, and I think the Knicks have an identity now with Josh Hart coming off the bench and what he does and what he brings to the table. I think Julius Randle has turned it around. I mean, Julius Randle, he's in the 3-point contest for God's sake this weekend. Like, it's crazy.
because he doesn't have to do as much as previous seasons.
Yeah, but I still think at the end of games they become isolation heavy and a little bit predictable. And while I trust Jalen Brunson to take the last shot of that game every time, I'll take him every single time, and he leads the league, I think, this year in clutch points. But again, it's still you just don't have that takeover guy. He's starting to become that, but I still need to see guys. I love how Quentin Grimes and Quickly and even Josh Hart now cut off the ball in those late game situations and move off the ball. I think that's huge because when one guy's dribbling and everyone's standing around at the end of the game, especially in a long series, it gets a little bit tough. So look, let's go Knicks. I really think they can be really special. You could listen. I did an hour with Jake Brown actually on my from the Knicks wall. We did an hour on my podcast about the Knicks. So I'm excited about this team. Don't get me wrong, but I still think um, yeah, like I said, if they face Cleveland, if they can get the 5 seed and they can face Cleveland in the first
Yeah,
round, they could win a playoff series.
I agree with you, but I think we all know this: Celtics, Bucks, and Sixers. They're on a different level. But the
Really,
Knicks,
Celtics and
at home
Bucks.
especially, yes, I agree. Yeah, I don't think the Sixers are going to do a lot. I know Spike Eskin won't like us for that, but that's just what history tells us. But I think the Knicks at home, especially, are a really tough team to beat.
It's funny because I feel like the road teams have a more of an advantage at Madison Square Garden because there's always that guy who comes into Madison Square Garden and feels like, oh, here I am. I'm here at Madison Square
Yeah,
Garden. I'm going to take over. It's almost like they get energized by it. Obviously, the atmosphere is different in Madison Square Garden than any other building in the world, and I feel like some of the road guys, especially a guy like Donovan Mitchell, gets energized by that. We saw it happen with Trae Young in the playoffs a couple of years ago, where he was energized by that. So I think the Knicks, one of their biggest advantage actually is that they are one of the better teams on the road in the NBA this season, and so I think that could be a big advantage for them.
yeah. So we'll see. All-Star break is now. Thankfully, they're healthy. Unlike the Bucks, Giannis just got injured, so they just got to stay healthy. Then we'll see. And then finally, the New York Yankees. I'm very excited for the season. I'm a huge Garrett Cole guy. I don't know about yourself. I hope so.
Look, it's funny. One of my videos went viral of me booing him off the mound in Detroit last year, but
Oh, I think I saw that video. That was a
yeah,
terrible game. Terrible.
yeah, I think Barstool reposted it and a bunch of other places reposted it. So yeah, again, I there's one thing that I think New Yorkers can all agree on. Like when we're rooting for athletes, we're okay with bad performances, we're okay with injuries. We forgive anything. The only thing we can't forgive is effort and excuses. Like
Mhm.
when Julius Randle last year, when the Knicks fans turned on him, it was because he was making excuses off the floor and he wasn't giving effort. The numbers were there. The numbers actually are pretty similar last year to this year, but what drove people insane was his lack of effort. I think the same thing with Garrett Cole. When he comes off a start that's pretty bad, and he goes, "I actually think I pitched pretty well." I think that drives Yankee fans
Yeah.
insane. And that's what drives me insane about him. You want him to have that same fiery dog attitude that you see on the mound, like that you saw in the Houston game a couple of years ago where he threw that complete game shutout. You want to see that. You don't want to hear excuses. You don't want to hear anything like that. You want to hear him say, and it was fun to hear him say this week that he thought that they got waxed in that series. Like,
That's a great line.
yeah, Brian Cashman says, like, he's like, I mean, we made it to the ALCS. Like, what else do you want from
I
us?
can't stand that. Yeah.
That's crazy to me because you weren't even the same. You snuck into the ALCS barely, and then you weren't even in the same league as the Houston Astros in that series.
Yeah, they usually either blame injuries or they say we did good. But us Yankees fans, we all know what the expectations are. We all know what the goals are, and it's not to get swept in the ALCS. We've been in the ALCS in 17 and 19. We got to get it back to the World Series. But going back to Garrett Cole, what was I going to say? Oh, I feel like Yankees fans, not you, but just Yankees fans think he's been terrible. I just looked at his playoff stats. He's basically only had that one bad game against Boston, which, mind you, was a horrible game. But last season of playoffs and before 2020, he's been really good. So that's all we can ask for, really.
Yeah, and you just want him to be that guy that when you need him most, it feels like in the biggest moments, he's the guy who steps up. That's what we had. We were so spoiled with Derek Jeter, even CC Sabathia. In the biggest moments, that's when he pitched his best games. And so you want him to be that guy, but it feels like right now the pitching is not the problem. Like they add Tommy Kahnle, they add Rodon. I feel like the bullpen and the pitching rotation is going to be, even without Frankie Montas, like we don't know what a good Frankie Montas was like. Like that trade was terrible, but it's not a loss because the Yankees never had a good version of Frankie Montas. So whoever is in that spot, whether it's Clark Schmidt, who I love, and he ended up saving that game. He pitched that game in Detroit and came in for Garrett Cole in that game and basically won that game for them. He did the same thing. He had a 4-inning save or something like that at a game I was at earlier in Baltimore last year also, where it was like 100 and something degrees that day. It was beyond
in like the middle of July, right?
Yeah, it was the hottest day of the year. And he pitched an incredible game in Baltimore. He pitched 3 innings or something like that. So I think he deserves a shot at the fifth spot in the rotation.
Herman.
What was that?
Over Domingo Herman.
Herman deserves a shot also. My point is, I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world that they lost Frankie Montas. I still think their pitching is great, but can their hitting come through in the clutch? That's the biggest question. Can they come through when they need it most? And the answer the last few years has been no.
Yeah, they barely even get any hits against Houston. Doesn't even matter if it's the playoffs. They got no hit in the middle of the summer, and then they got like 2 hits. They just can't hit Houston. And even though they lost Justin Verlander, I still think Houston's going to be the best team in the American League. Framber Valdez is an absolute superstar. I wouldn't be surprised if he'll win the Cy Young. Luis Garcia is only going to get better. And then Lance McCullers, he is what he is, but they just have they're just stacked with pitchers.
And they reinvent themselves every year. I mean, you think you lose Correa, and then all of a sudden the next shortstop is even better. And like and adding Yordan Alvarez and guys who weren't there the first time around, like all these pieces, it just feels like Kyle Tucker, like every single one of these guys, they have been what they've done with their organization, and kudos to them because I think before last year, you could talk about the cheating, you could talk about all those different things. But last year, they proved no, we turned over the team. We continued to get better. We lost Garrett Cole. We lost Carlos Correa. We lost some of the guys who were the faces of that team, and we still only got better and then won another World Series. So hats off to them because they are they're the best team in Major League Baseball, and I think they are like the team that everyone should look to try and emulate.
100%. You can't hate them anymore because they cheated. You could only hate them because you can't beat them.
Yep, that's exactly.
And then talking about the hitting, they didn't really improve the hitting at all. I mean, they got Judge back, they got Rizzo back, but they didn't really get anybody back. One guy who I'm extremely excited to have for a full season is Harrison Bader. Harrison Bader was unbelievable last playoffs, and I think he's going to be an awesome player every single day out in center field. And then I'm interested to see in left field as well. And then I think Gleyber is going to have a better season in a contract year, but we're going to have to see. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of Gleyber, but the Yankees definitely need him to be what they think he was or was going to be.
I think Gleyber is motivated this year because, like you said, it's a contract year. I don't want to see Aaron Hicks start a single game for this team, but
he is. I mean, that's just the reality. He is.
Yeah, and Harrison Bader. I mean, talk about that trade. I kind of put something out last week where it was like, or a couple weeks ago, I think I put out a poll like, would you trade Harrison Bader straight up today for Jordan Montgomery? And then I
100%.
replied and everyone was like, no, I would never trade Harrison Bader away to get Jordan Montgomery back. And like I put up all the replies, all the people who originally were like, this is the worst trade ever. How could you do this? Blah, blah, blah. And so it's just funny how people like to forget about the positive sometimes. So I'm just here to remind people.
And I was one of those people because we traded away Jordan Montgomery, and then he ended up pitching a shutout and had like a 0.5 ERA in his first 3 starts, and we got a guy back who was in a boot. But sometimes you have to trust Brian Cashman. We like to chirp Brian Cashman for the bad moves, but I always say Cashman makes great moves and he also makes bad moves. He's not just a horrible GM like you hear some people saying.
I'm with you on that one.
Yeah. All right, so that's basically all I got. I just want to thank you one more time for coming on here. I had a ton of fun talking, and I hope we stay in touch.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep, thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
All right, guys, so just to wait, Rami, are you still here?
I'm still here.
Okay, do you want to shout out your podcast and your Twitter and everything?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Thanks. At Rami _Lavi on Twitter. So that's RAMILAVI. So it's Rami _Lavi on Twitter. Rami.Lavi on Instagram, and then TikTok is Rami _Lavi podcast. It's the Rami Lavi podcast, available Apple, Spotify, Audacy, and wherever you get your podcast.
Awesome. Thank you very much again.
All right, thank you. All right, I'll see you.
All right, guys. So that was a long show. That was an awesome show. To end everything, I have a few announcements. One, follow myself as well on Twitter at Ben Washman4 and on TikTok at Ben the Sports Guy. And my final announcement here, this weekend is Penn State Thon. If you don't know what Thon is, it is a 46-hour, no sitting, no sitting, just standing dance marathon to raise money in the fight for pediatric cancer. If you want to donate, the link is in my TikTok. It's on my Twitter. It's the first thing there. So go donate. Everybody have an amazing day. Have an amazing weekend. And thank you very much.